All right, the recording begins. This is November 3rd, 2025. The class is ESM 105. Thank you all for making it once again. Awesome. So I decided to combine the week 10 and week 11 PowerPoints into a single file since there was a significant overlap. So in week 10, if you want this PowerPoint, you can find it. It's the week 10 ecological economics and human populations instead of being a separate week 11 PowerPoint. Okay. Good stuff. We're making good progress. Don't forget, everybody, to do your discussions every Friday. They're available until Sunday. And don't forget to continue working on your annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliography resources are on the main page of Canvas. So check those links out. And you want to get started now? You know, it's week 11. We got a month left of classes, basically. You don't want to put the whole thing off for during fall break or something, because that's when you're supposed to, I hope, be on break. Anyways, let's get back into our PowerPoint stuff. I'm pretty darn excited to talk to you about conservation easements, which are much more exciting than they sound. Alrighty. So we were ending our discussion with green design, green consumerism, and then we're going to have a slide here about how environmental protection can create jobs. All right? So what's green consumerism? Green consumerism is when you market something as sustainable, basically. All the labeling of this is organic, this is produced under this has been certified as palm oil free and things like that. Advertising your potato chips as generating wind energy. All of these things are examples of green consumerism, where you are trying to get the market to shift to favor processes or practices, right, that cost money. So it costs you money to qualify to put the label on your package that says this product is certified palm oil free. We talked about palm oil and negative environmental impacts of palm oil a little bit, focusing more on the biofuels perspective. But palm oil growth is, there's a lot of issues with it. A lot of monocultures, a lot of clear cuts being conducted in order to grow palm oil. It's also not very good for you. So there's that too, which is what you tend to get green consumerism shifting into. People be like, I only eat organic because it's healthier for me. And that's great in the marketplace because you are encouraging buying of those products, and organic labeling usually requires, say, not using chemical pesticides, stuff like that. But there are a lot of different groups that are in the market now of producing new certification standards and then making sure that companies adhere to those and then designing a nice logo. You all watched the film Hancock, right? Yeah, everybody saw Hancock. That was the whole thing in that movie. The main character's goal was to get companies to donate money to good causes, and he would give them this disgusting happy face logo they could put on their products. And then Hancock puts it on the moon to get him publicity at the end. That film was written by the creator of Breaking Bad. Isn't that fun trivia? That's probably the thing that you'll leave today with in your head. Anyways, that's totally fine. Environmental protection creates jobs. Now, statements like this, it's very reasonable to say, hey, what sort of jobs? Like, where does the money come from for these jobs? These are all great questions to be considering, okay? But the idea behind a broad statement like this, environmental protection creates jobs, is that if you are encouraging, say, production of wind farms, if you're subsidizing alternative energy sources, then establishing those wind farms, let's stick with one example, all right, is going to create jobs. If you have cap and trade, then you create jobs involved in enforcing the cap and trade and doing regular, not surveys, but regular assessments of whether companies are actually keeping underneath the cap. Anyway, we talk about green jobs. This is the concept of green jobs. So green consumerism, green jobs, people make the money, they spend the money, and everything generates, it moves the market over to encouraging sustainable practices. Fair enough. I want to get into a more specific example because more specific examples tend to have fewer generalizations, and they have more real information condensed in them. So I've got a few slides for you about conservation easements and what is a conservation easement and how people access the funds for conservation easements and how conservation easements are managed. So what is it? Let's start with an example. It'll be me. I am now a member of a family of 3, and these are my siblings. And I'm very different from my siblings. They're much thinner than me. They bob up and down constantly, and they have these little gradations on them. Also, they don't care about farming. They don't like to be farmers, all right? They want to sell the land. I want to be a farmer. I have lived on the farm my entire life, and I want to, now that I've inherited that land, use it. So you've got options, right? What do you do? Well, you sell all the land, and then I take my third and I use it to purchase a different farm. Or we sell off 2/3 of the land, and then my 2 siblings take the money and leave. All right? Is this visual aid helping? I know it is. I know it means a lot. All right. But think about these sorts of things. There are taxes on that land, okay, that have to be paid each year. Maybe the farm is no longer operating at a profit. Where's all this money going to come from? Is there another option? And there are other options, okay, in the form of conservation easements. So, as a private landowner, you have many rights about what you can do with your land. Usually, this is all determined by zoning. Depending on how the land is zoned, that determines what you can do with your land, all right? So if an area is zoned commercial versus residential, you can't set up a business in an area zoned residential, for example, right? Simple, straightforward zoning laws. Of course, they're going to be super complicated. You've got land, it's zoned as farmland. I can do basically whatever I want on my farmland. There might be some supervision over effluent, like what leaves in waterways that pass through my farmland. That protection may be there, it may not be there, right? But let's say I'm willing to give up some of those rights. Like I give up the right to remove native plants, all right? As a private landowner, I can do that. If I give that right up, I can actually sell that as an easement to another institution. They will pay me for giving up some of my rights on what I can do on my land. That's the big overall idea behind conservation easements. So farming, grazing, making temporary roads, impounding or taking water, and cutting timber. Let's say that on a portion of the farmland, I give up the right to cut timber. You can see immediately the benefits here with our discussions of carbon sequestration. Maybe I try to get involved in the carbon market and sell that area off as undeveloped. But I don't want to give up the land, all right? But I'm willing to give up some rights to utilizing the land. And that's the idea behind conservation easements, all right? In general, if you sign up for a conservation easement, and this is also the most common type of general easement, all right? If you sign up for a conservation easement, you usually have to allow people to come onto the land to check the land out and make sure you're complying with the easement. The most common type of general easement that if, I know all of you own at least 2 houses, right? Yeah, you got your house here, you got your house up in Washington for when you go skiing. I know how students are. Someday you'll get to have 5, like me. That's a joke, of course. General easements. If you own any property, you're probably signed up for a general easement. And that includes PG&E in California, right? PG&E can just access your land in order to do maintenance and servicing of energy supply lines and gas supply lines, supply pipes, and things like that. Maybe the city has an easement to service plumbing lines, okay, on your land. There's all sorts of general easements that are put in place. It'll be somewhere in the contract when you buy the land. Here's an example of sort of what that language can look like in an actual easement from the county of Plumas, all right? They say, hey, PG&E gets to go and build things, rebuild things, install, inspect, maintain, replace, remove, and use facilities of these different types, all right? What's the main thing? You can affect ingress and egress, which are just legal ways of saying entering and leaving, all right? You can come onto the land, you can leave the land. There's usually some language about, hey, if they cause damage, they're gonna be responsible for it. There might be language about the company needing to give you a notice that they're going to be accessing your land. But this here is a general easement that everybody just basically accepts. Anybody living in, California usually accepts if you're receiving energy, if you're on the grid, right? So I don't know. I thought this was moderately interesting. An actual little easement map of these are the easement areas where PG&E can freely sort of just access them. All right. And then the rest of these areas, it indicates who owns these areas, where's the street, how big's the easement area, okay? And then this is what a general easement sort of looks like. Fair enough? So now we move on to specifically conservation easements. So remember, those general easements, those don't have the goal of increasing sustainability or contributing to conservation, all right? They're practical general easements because you don't want to have to, PG&E doesn't want to sue every time they need to service a line or something like that, or be sued because they went out to do service, build something. Usually these easements last in perpetuity. So you buy the land and there's already an easement on the property, all right? And that's what that means. One of your rights as a private landowner is to exclude access, and a general easement often gives that right up, yes? Not usually, no. It's usually not possible to get these removed, all right? And it's similar with conservation easements. They're supposed to last in perpetuity, but there are examples of, so I shouldn't say just no, there are examples of people suing to do this, of like, I'm no longer purchasing energy from PG&E. I'm going totally off the grid. I want this stuff out of here. I don't want anybody coming out here. All right, you can sue to get the easement changed. There's usually a lawsuit involved, based on at least my background research there. Yeah, I'm sure sometimes it's friendly because PG&E, they're a friendly company, Yeah. Yep. They're easy to get on the phone. They always tell you when there's going to be an outage. We love them. If you're listening right now, PG&E, I love you. Give me more electricity. I need more power. Fantastic. So these easements, they're all about giving up property rights, which is it's a scary sounding thing, honestly. Like, why did I buy the property? I want to have my little safe haven plot of land. But easements are general easements are generally there already. So now that we've established that the easement in itself is not an alien foreign thing that isn't common, we can talk about conservation easements, please.
Aren't usually the power panels and stuff that the PG&E accesses with the easements, aren't they usually outside of the houses?
Mm-hmm.
Or I guess maybe some special cases, but
Yeah, they are exactly like you said. I'm just going to repeat it for the recording. They're usually off of they're not in the house, they're not on the house, they're nearby, but they might be on the property. And that's part of it, is whoever signed up originally for the easement dictated the location of where the easement would be in that parcel. So you say, oh, this is our parcel, it has this easement right here. So you're buying all this land. John Hunter owns all of this land, all right? But there's an easement on this property. So does John Hunter get taxed for that portion of the land with the easement on it? It's not really using it so much. These are good questions to think about, right? Yeah. And that comes up with talking about conservation easements. So if I'm saying I'm going to give up the right to utilize a portion of my land to realize some capital in the short term, I need money to pay, let's say it's a massive farm and you're actually paying inheritance tax on it. I need to realize some capital to get at that, and I don't want to sell the land off, but I used to play in those woods. We're back to the example of I've got my two evil siblings, and they're like, give us the money, sell the farm. I don't care that our dogs are buried there. They're the bad guys in this story, all right? Just because I'm the main character, as per usual. Anyways, you need to realize capital in the short term. I say, oh, I loved those woods. I used to play out in them when I was a kid. I never intend on cutting them down. But wouldn't it be nice if I could ensure that they would never be cut down? So rather than selling off 2/3 of the property, I just allow a conservation easement to be placed on that land where I give up the right to harvest that timber. So I'm relinquishing some rights by recognizing ecological or conservation value in a conservation easement. Maybe my actual motive is there's an aesthetic or cultural or just familial significance to that plot of land, that portion of the property, all right? And these are still conservation values that we've sort of spoken about already. So, what do conservation easements do? Kind of what I've been talking about already, reducing intensity of certain activities, like reducing timber harvest, or excluding specific activities entirely, like excluding grazing from a portion of the land that you own. So far, so good? Okay. The idea here is that the easements are going to persist in perpetuity, meaning that the easement lasts even if you sell the land, all right, or if it transfers ownership in any way. So you set the easement, you get the money now, and then when you sell the property, it's usually considered as a reduced value to the next farmer because they don't get to harvest timber from that land. So far, makes sense? So you're getting the capital in the short term. And that land gets to be set aside for a conservation purpose. The easements are site-specific, so one easement to another easement can be very, very different. It's not like a general purpose, slap it on like, oh yeah, there's a $10,000 forest easement and I'm gonna take it, and it's $10,000 per acre, or something like that, okay? Very good, very good. So, conservation easements have sort of experienced their boom period, where a lot of conservation easements many new conservation easements were being purchased, were being established, put into place, all right? And you can see that at about 2015, and levels are pretty consistent here, the conservation easement, the amount of area in the United States has sort of leveled off. And people who question how effective these conservation easements are, also people who are just trying to determine questioning that the conservation easements have been effective includes people who want to demonstrate that they've been effective. I want to make that clear. This terminology of the era of stewardship, it basically is used to describe the time that we are in right now, where the easements have been established, and now we're going to see how well they hold up in court, how well they can be enforced, and what that looks like as they transfer ownership. Are people willing to buy land that has conservation easements on it? All right. So I found this nice example of a court case, all right, which indicates another benefit of having conservation easements. Often conservation easements come with some sort of tax break, right? You're giving up your ability to access or use the land, so why do I have to pay the full taxes on it? Question.
Do you think this happens at all in Humboldt County with like marijuana farms?
That's a great question. Does it happen in Humboldt County with marijuana farms? It happens in Humboldt County a lot. There are a ton of different land trusts. There are a ton of different organizations that exist purely to accrue money and then purchase conservation easements on land. Humboldt County is a huge area for it. I am certain that there are examples of it being done with a marijuana farm that's becoming defunct, right? Like, well, we're not making enough money off of this anymore. We need some money. Let's put this into this now. Let's get a conservation easement out here, and we'll stop growing marijuana.
Issues with like, especially the usage of water.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if you've got an issue with, okay, people own this land and they have the right to access water, to impound water, we'd call it, right? And you as the conservation group want to stop that, but can't get enough money to necessarily buy all that land, maybe you can purchase a conservation easement or compensate them for accepting a conservation easement, which reduces the amount of water that they can impound. So it reduces irrigation use, And that would be a more cost-effective way to actually accomplish your environmental goal that also doesn't require this charitable organization taking ownership of a plot of land and then having its, board of trustees or whoever's involved in making decisions get involved there. Yeah, it's a great question. I love it. And I'm positive that there's at least one example because, like I said, conservation easements are a big thing around here. The previous instructor of this course, he was involved in multiple land trust organizations that were a small scale and were established to get conservation easements put into place. Yeah, so Jeffrey Dunk, you can talk to him if you want like specifics. He'll tell you exactly which ones exist, I'm sure. Yeah. Very cool. So this company here, where's my additional note of the Atkinson case? Oh, golf course owners. Yeah, this Atkinson case is very interesting. They purchased land. It had conservation easements on it. They turned the land into a golf course, and they wanted to continue getting the benefit of having those conservation easements, specifically the tax breaks. They're like, we've adhered to the requirements of the conservation easement, and so we should still get this this income excluded from being taxed, right? And it required going to court, taking ecologists out there who determined, okay, what's the actual environmental benefit of this golf course? Which species live out here? They were presenting certain data about species diversity. And if you remember our discussions of diversity, you hopefully realize just how easy it is to manipulate that sort of data or how little that data really tells us. Because they showed, well, we've got increased species diversity here. Like, what do you want? That was one of the goals of the conservation easement. So it's better than if we paved the whole thing, right? I don't think, we could probably agree it is probably better than if they paved the whole thing. But what about the irrigation requirements? And then what species are there? The main species there was, I think it was Canada geese. And it's like, yeah, that's great. They have a place to stop during migration, solid. But is that really in keeping with the goals of the initial conservation easement? So these sorts of court cases are happening. And this is one of the key characteristics of the era of stewardship that we're currently in with conservation easements. We're finding out how they work. Yeah.
Who won this case?
They lost the Atkinson group, the golf course owners. Wait, no, was it Atkinson or Commissaire? I forget which one owned the golf course.
Yeah.
The golf course people lost.
That makes sense because
Yeah.
if you develop a property into a golf course, it's not really going to be
Yeah. Absolutely. And are there ways to make golf courses more sustainable versus less sustainable? Absolutely. All right. But, that's not what the initial conservation easement was trying to do. And if they want to do that, then they need to deal with a different sort of situation. And then we've got questions like they established the golf course. So what about the conservation easement? Was there a penalty? Did the conservation easement just expire? It's supposed to be in place in perpetuity. And to kind of like to your question earlier, and this easement ended up, it was like a de facto expiration, which should never have happened because they just went ahead and developed it. And they don't get the benefits of the easement anymore, the reduction in tax rates, but somebody realized a bunch of or a sum of money for getting the conservation easement put into place, and the intention of that sum of money was to preserve the land indefinitely, right? You see what I mean? So it's a big question. Yes, please.
So did they get fined for putting the milk instead?
In looking into the case, I didn't see any fines. They were required to pay the taxes that they had attempted to not pay. And I think there may have been, I'm remembering, hopefully I remember this correctly. They'd done this for a year and sort of gotten away with it. And then the next year they were sued and they had to pay taxes for both of the years. One of those situations. And as with any case like this, I'm sure that there were legal expenses that they had to pay for the other parties involved, which, is a really interesting thing about legal stuff. I had to learn this the hard way. If somebody decides to sue you and they win the case in any aspect, at least in Oregon and California, even if they say somebody, this is interesting, I think. Okay, say somebody sues you, we'll use real numbers from my life. Say somebody sues you for $40,000, or they threaten to sue you for $40,000, and they know that they are probably only going to get $10,000. Well, they can get the most expensive lawyer that's possible and accrue legal fees well beyond that difference of 30 grand, all right? And then as the person being sued, that if you lose that case, even if they only get awarded $5,000, you have to pay all the legal expenses they accrued. So in this way, people who can afford expensive lawyers can leverage you into settling out of court. Isn't that great? That happened to me, and I'm very bitter about it. I guess I'm not over it. So I don't know, it has nothing to do with this, but I got to complain to an entire class of students about it. I'm sorry for the diversion. Yeah. There was a shed on a piece of property I inherited that went onto the neighbor's property, and I didn't disclose that during the sale. Anyways, let's keep on moving forward. It only took 6 years to pay off, don't worry. Moving forward, all right, the value of land trusts, okay? How much do you get paid? It kind of depends on how much your property was worth and which property rights you're actually going to, give up, all right? So land trusts. These land trusts are groups that you can consider it as they take stewardship of the easement, all right? So they're like nonprofit groups with an elected board, and what they do is somebody takes on the conservation easement, and they take a sum of money and pay them and say, awesome, now we're going to be in charge of enforcing that easement. So the money has gone all from private groups, right? There's no government agency here that's saying, well, we're going to buy conservation easements. There's a land trust group of citizens who have decided that we want to prioritize getting landowners to give up rights to their land that are causing undue environmental impact. So these are organizations that you can donate money to, you can be a part of, all right? Additionally, we've got this option where the landowner can donate the easement and then deduct the value of the easement from taxes. Rules for this are going to differ from state to state and region to region, okay? But it's usually something like you determine the sort of marginal loss, like you determine the loss of income that you're going to suffer because of the easement. And then over the next 10 years, you deduct 1/10 of that from your taxable income each year. Does that sort of make sense reasonably enough? Yes, please.
So if you own, say you own like an easement, right, and like a park, like a forest,
Mm-hmm.
can you just I'm guessing you can't just leave it alone, let it burn down, right? You have to still take care of it.
No, probably not. Yeah, the easement that you have is entirely involved in whoever owns that land right now can't do these things. Now, somebody can't do a prescribed burn on that area if it's not allowed under the easement or if it's prohibited under the easement, right?
But if something entire like land just gets overgrown?
Yeah.
Can't you just leave it like that?
Yeah, you can totally just leave it like that. Yeah. It depends on what the easement is. And the owner still owns that land.
Right.
So if the easement said you can't harvest timber, it doesn't mean you have to do any maintenance procedures or do anything about developing a buffer zone, for example, anything like that. You can cut down right up to the edge of where the easement starts. Now, a good easement would include, you've got this easement here, which prohibits timber harvesting entirely, and then you've got this other easement around the outside of it. So you got the no timber, and then you've got the other easement surrounding it, where it generally creates a buffer zone or a transition zone, like we've been talking about, right? Where practices are, where more things are allowed, but not everything's allowed. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff here. Yes, please.
Kind of jumping off that question, does
Yeah.
the easement allow like purposeful neglect of the land until it's destroyed? Like if an owner purposefully just did not take care of the land until it was kind of just a barren landscape, would the easement still be in place? They still wouldn't be able to touch it?
Yeah, yeah. The easements are pretty, the easement usually is a prohibitive thing, not a prescriptive thing. So it stops certain practices from being done there, but it doesn't necessarily require, you have to invest more resources into maintaining that easement. Now, easements are site-specific, so an easement could include that, but in general, these are removing activity from a land, moving closer to a preserve model rather than a managed model. Make sense a little bit? Awesome. Yes?
Why have the buffer zone? Why not just have like a larger no timber zone at all?
Yeah. Oh, that would work. That would work as well. Or maybe it wouldn't work as well, but the idea is then the land trust does not have to purchase this entire area as an easement. They have a certain easement here, and then maybe a voluntary easement or a less expensive easement. They didn't have to compensate as much because you're still allowed to graze animals there. You just can't actively remove timber, something like that. Yeah. So it's, balancing these costs. Awesome. I love it. So land trusts, not to be confused with community land trusts, which we spoke about earlier. And in these community land trusts, it was a while ago. My goodness. In the community land trusts, a group owns the land, all right? But then it's meant to be developed and people buy houses on the land and they don't own the actual space, the plot of land that the house sits upon. The goal here is usually to sell that home later, use the equity you put into that home, and then keep the cycle going where you eventually buy a property where you own the land as well. Anyway, community land trusts are a little bit different than land trusts that are involved in managing, purchasing, establishing conservation easements. So what are some pros and cons of a land trust? Well, the land could be protected from development or overexploitation, all right? There's a board of directors that agrees in how the land should be managed, all right? The trust can provide public access and recreational activities. So it could be allowed that this forest can be explored, people can come into it even though it's still private land. Just because you prevent some activities and sell off some rights to a plot of land, it doesn't mean that you sell all of them. And you have the right to exclude access to your land. And maybe that's one of the things that the conservation easement is also purchasing from you. It's weird language to say they're purchasing it from you, but I think that y'all sort of know what I mean there, yeah? Okay, cool. The easement may expire after a certain number of years, all right? That's a big con. It can expire, they're supposed to be in perpetuity. But if the land trust dissolves and isn't managing it anymore, all right, if it's been 10 years and you've already gotten back all of the money on taxed income from the donation that you gave, maybe you just stop worrying about it, all right? It can be in the rules that the easement's actually going to expire, but they're usually designed to persist forever. Why do you use the land trust? Well, this is listed as a con in this figure, all right? But it's also the reason to have these land trusts at all, right? They're groups that have enough money to get a conservation easement, but not enough money to just buy the land outright. And we kind of talked about that earlier, the benefits of that. The management plan, all right? You got a management plan. Maybe you got pie in the sky ideals when you put that management plan in place, and then you realize that, we as the land trust are now investing money because we signed on to do active management on that conservation easement. So they're usually, like I said to you earlier, it's usually don't do things, but also allow us to do things could be in the conservation easement. Let us access it and do these things. Don't let the land go to pot, right? But then that costs money. Where does that come from? If you're a land trust and you have too many easements that you're trying to employ active management on, now you've got yourself in a sticky situation. Okay, please.
What would happen if the land trust got dissolved and then all those properties that they owned?
Yeah.
What would happen to them?
Well, then there's usually no body to try to enforce. Okay. Exactly. So like you sell the land and say, there's technically a land trust here. I'm going to sue to get that conservation easement removed, or I'm going to apply to get that conservation easement removed, and it never even goes to court because that was a private agreement that you entered into with an entity that no longer exists. So it's a serious consideration, Maybe it's a benefit to like, hey, at least we got 10 years of conservation out of it, even and didn't pay that much. And then people who are allowing these conservation easements on their lands realize, well, that group's going to eventually dissolve. They all eventually dissolve, Yeah. Yes?
You might go over this later, but is there like an organization that like keeps track of all this land trust?
Actually, I did not find an overarching there's usually something like that. Like when we were talking about carbon credits, it was relatively simple to find a number of organizations that are involved in making sure the carbon credits are high quality and then enforcing the carbon credits. There's like big umbrella organizations. But in my research on conservation land trusts, because they're so site specific, it seems like there's not a real overarching governing body, which is probably part of why we're hitting this plateau here, right? Yeah. And rest assured, there are larger land trusts that attempt to play that role and maybe accrue conservation easements from other smaller land trusts that are going defunct. That absolutely happens. The management of the land trust can move between bodies. That totally does happen. But as far as like, is there a government entity that makes sure that all conservation land trusts are being enforced? Not really. Yeah. Yes?
I'm curious how these easements are enforced because I feel like landowners could make the case like, oh, some trees just happened to fall down in the buffer zone, or a tree fell out of the easement zone and now it's on my property. Like, are there people from the easement who take regular surveys and count trees?
That is usually included in these conservation easements, but it's site specific, right? So I shouldn't say usually, I should say that it's regularly included in conservation easements where we get to come out there, you give up part of your right to allow us to access the area and do our surveys, and we're going to make sure that this area that you haven't just gone out here and cut down a bunch of trees, so you go out there and you do investigations. So then if you don't adhere to the conservation easement, it goes to court, right? And you say, well, we gave you this much money, we want it back, or you need to give us more land under a different conservation easement. And it's of course going to be a nightmare, because of the lack of an overarching system for this. But conservation easements from the optimistic perspective are pretty effective, and they are a form of community property management, right? It's like a communal property management system that doesn't really involve one central body owning a bunch of land, and that's meant to integrate everybody into the community more. A lot of the conservation easement stories are farmers getting older and loves this aspect of the land and donates a conservation easement. A lot of conservation easements are donated and not necessarily purchased, all right? But you're now not realizing income from them, and you can usually deduct those from your taxes. Now, if they can be deducted from the taxes, that's going to be enforced differently because now you're actually dealing with government money, right? Anyways, let's hit our summary slide about conservation easements. They're voluntary. You give up some property rights that devalues your property. You may acquire that value right now, all right? It can be donated, it can be purchased, it can be a combination of donation and purchase, all right? I get my siblings to go off to the big city and do their big city things with a pocket full of money, all right? And all I really lost was that forest that I never wanted to develop now has some protection on it. And maybe it's even encouraged that the community comes and enjoys the forest that I loved so much as a child. Of course, it's a very optimistic view, but it's happened, and that's wonderful, you know? So there's a value of conservation easements. What are the land trusts? The land trusts are the conservation organizations that negotiate, hold, and monitor conservation easements. All right? So they're in charge of enforcing them. Okay, so why would you engage in one of these? I've attempted to hit most of these as I've been going in my description of conservation easements, but the economic one is pretty straightforward, right? You can't afford the taxes on the land, or you need to realize some of the money on the land, but you don't want to sell the land. And a lot of conservation easements are negotiated during inheritance. A big farm's got a lot of value in it, but it's not necessarily, you can't realize that value immediately without selling the land. It's one of the issues that farmers have, is I've got all this land and on paper I'm a millionaire, you know, but I don't make $1 million every year. How do I pay for these costs and these things? All right. And I was going to have a whole section in ecological economics about farm bills and subsidies to farmers, because it's all really, really fascinating. But I quickly realized I would run out of, we'd be in like week 15 and we'd be finally wrapping that up, because it's really fascinating. It's really super fascinating. If you're interested in that, like there's that documentary King Corn, which is still pretty good, you know? It's all about easements given out to corn farmers, or not easements, sorry, subsidies for corn farmers and why corn's in everything, and yeah. Anyway, cultural value. All right, why would you engage in a conservation easement? You like the current use of the land, you like it being set aside, you don't want anything to happen there anyways, so what if I could just have a land trust that would enforce that the land's not used in a different way? So it's a way to protect land as well. You get a reputable land trust and you say, hey, I want you to manage my conservation easement here. All right, I'm going to donate this land to you because I don't want to try to enforce or make sure that anybody else in my family, or that my kids, or that when I sell this land, I'm about to sell this land and I don't want that forest to get harvested. So I negotiate a conservation easement on that forest, and then I sell the land. And I get less money, but I didn't have to entirely, I got to choose who would be managing that portion of the property. You see? So you find a good conservation, you find a good land trust there. And then, of course, there's ecological, all right, considerations here. Maybe you're doing this purely out of a concern for ecological processes, or because you recognize conservation values. All right, the last thing I'll say is a good land trust, it's probably got a lot of members who are informed and educated about how to manage the land in a sustainable way. So you're also signing up for this little brain trust of people who can inform how it should be managed. Maybe they implement the management, maybe you implement the management, but you got a second set of eyes on this, and you got it on paper that they're managing it. Anyways, that concludes our discussion of conservation easements. And on Wednesday, we will start talking about human populations. What are we going to do? Are we going to hit a carrying capacity? Or are we going to overshoot and then fall too far down? We'll We won't have an answer because we don't know, but we'll talk about it at least, which is what we do in this class. All right, thank you all. Thank you for watching.